This is a short or brief example of how to use Geopath to do roughing cuts for Mazatrol and G-code output. I'm going to go to Program and change existing graphics program to open up a file we already have. In the Geopath folder is a DXF file. I'm changing the files of type here to AutoCAD DXF and then picking Lathe demo.dxf right out of the SLN folder and hitting Open. Here we've got a part with some stock kind of highlighted by my mouse, and then the part edge is this here. It'll be a little easier to see by going to Layers and Color by Layer. You can tell that the green items here are or represent the part edge, whereas the yellow items represent the edge of the stock. To kind of turn off the stock and the other items, such as this origin designation here that we don't need, I'm going to go to Layers and Set. I'm going to locate the layer here that's green under the color column and just left click on that layer so it's highlighted on the layer name lists on the left side. Then I'm going to go down and hit All Invisible and then hit OK. That turns everything off except that one page or layer that's green, which has just the part edge, and in addition to that some extra geometry we don't, or I'm sorry, extra dimensions that we don't need. For the purposes of this example, I'm going to go to Modify and Erase and simply eliminate those dimensions and the leader lines and such forth associated with them, just to speed this up. Now I'm going to go ahead and make the cut. Since I'm only working with one layer, I'm going to go back to Layers, Color by Layer again. That switches it back to what we call Color by Function. Now the colors represent not what page or layer it's on, but what the cutting status is. The current cut, for example, will be light blue, and every cut after that that you generate, the previous cut will turn red. So light blue will always be your current cut, red will be some previous cut you've already made, versus the yellow color that you see here now is uncut CAD. You haven't done anything with it yet. I'm going to go to Tool/Cut, Make New Tool or Cut. The first time I do that, it's going to ask me to pick a machine. Remember that for Mazatrol output, it doesn't matter which machine you pick. I'm going to pick Lathe up here at the top to screen out all the other machines except turning machines. For G-code, you'd want to pick the exact machine that you want to use in terms of what G-code style you want to use. Fanuc versus Akuma, for example. For Mazatrol, it doesn't matter which machine you pick. You can pick anyone on the list and just continue from there. Select the long button here, Select Tool Library Technology Table, and then pick a material so that you can access the tool library built into the CAD/CAM software already. You don't have to use that, but if you do so, you'll get this list. These are some general tools that are already pre-made, ready to go, so as to speed things up, you don't have to create every tool from scratch as you go. On the list of tools, it might not be the first tool, but somewhere near the top of the list of the tools should be an 80-degree diamond cutter. We're going to do a face rough here to start out, so I'm going to pick this OD kind of GNL out style tool, and I'm going to hit Select. It's going to take me to the Tool Info page. This is one of 3 pages, really, that we're going to use. Just real briefly, for Mazatrol Matrix users, you want to adjust this Tool ID name at the top to be whatever you would normally use in the nominal diameter field for Mazatrol. So it's going to be GNL out, for example, for a typical diamond cutter, and with an underscore in between the two. And then you put in another underscore and the number that you want to use for that tool, and another underscore and the letter, if any, that you want to use for that tool. For G-code users, or for earlier style Mazak controls, Fusion 640T and below, you want to use the tool number field. That's the third row down here on the left. Likewise, for G-code, you also want this tool offset, or you want to pay attention to the tool offset field. Typically they're going to match, but this would output typically as T0101 combined. Moving on down here, these next 2 rows are already kind of filled out for us. The tool direction is the direction of the tool. I'm going to leave it on outside turning. That's an OD tool. Even though we're going to do a face rough, we're going to use an OD style tool to rough it. Likewise, the next row down here, the radius field's already filled out for you. That's the nose radius of this cutter, 31 thousandths. On the right here, angle 1 and angle 2, this is the lead and the back angle. Similar to the Mazatrol, for those of you that are used to Mazaks, These angles are measured from 12 o'clock. So this lead angle of 5, okay, we'll go into more detail on the angles at a later time. For the moment, the key thing to remember is that angle 1 and angle 2 added together equal the included angle of the tool. For a diamond cutter, you don't need to worry about the width. That's only used for groove cutters. Going on down here, you're going to jump all the way down to the bottom where it says use constant surface speed. For G-code, if you turn this on, you'll get G96, constant surface speed mode, and you'll want to fill out this max RPM and the surface feet per minute. Usually the max RPM on a Fanuc is a G50S, and this SFM would come out on the G96S line. For Mazotrol, it doesn't matter if you have this use constant surface speed on or off. It's always going to use constant surface speed, so therefore we're always going to look at this SFM box, regardless of whether you turn this button on or off. If you do turn it off, then we're assuming fixed RPMs for G-code output. Now the surface footage is not looked at for G-code, only the RPMs. Remember, for Mazotrol, we're always using the surface footage, regardless of whether you turn this on or off. I'm going to go ahead and hit Do It here. I'm going to pick the kind of cut I want to do. Just real briefly, contour is a finish pass of some kind. Rough is what we're going to do. That's any kind of rough cut, whether it's a face or an OD rough. Thread is a thread in, thread out, typical G76, G92, G33 for G-code. Drill is any kind of two-axis drill that includes spot drill, pecking, boring, reaming, tapping, any kind of turning drill for Mazotrol. Groove is a simple square groove of whatever shape and size. In Mazotrol, we're talking about a groove type 0, 1, 2, or 3. On the right there, cutoff, we're talking about a Mazak groove type 4, or, for any other machine, we're talking about a cutoff cut. You're parting off the part. Next one down there, bar feed, is some kind of stock advancement. You may have a bar feeder, bar puller, dual spindle machine, anything built into the actual program that advances the stock. You want to pick, we use the catch-all name bar feed here. Position the tool is used not so much as a cut by itself, but to kind of get the tool into position for some other cut before or after it. Again, we'll go back to that in more detail at a later time. Likewise here, special purpose command is any other non-cutting process that isn't covered by one of these other selections. You want to put a note in between two cuts, or insert some kind of stop, or otherwise insert a line of code somewhere in the program. You can use special purpose commands to do that. For the purposes of today's example, a face rough, we're going to pick this rough cut here and hit Do It. Here's the third window here, the Cut Info window. This has all the other details we haven't yet covered. Take a look at the second row here, the Finish Pass. This is the stock that you want to undercut by to leave theoretically for a finish pass. If you type in, for example, 5 thousandths, then it'll undercut the face there by 5 thou. You've got the part drawn presumably to its actual final edge. We're going to tell it here in Geopath, leave 5 thou for a finish pass. If you also want it to come back and clean off that 5 thou or finish off that 5 thou with the same tool, you can just pick this button right over here, do a cleanup pass. And even though it says cleanup, it'll really do a finish. It'll take off that 5 thou. For Mazotrol, if you pick do a cleanup pass, it'll generate a finish tool as part of that same roughing process. We're going to generate a facing or an edge face type process here. For G-code, if you turn on do a cleanup pass, you'll get a G70 canned finish cycle at the end of your G72 canned rough. On the next row down here, I'm sorry, I skipped over the X stock. Generally speaking, on the face rough, we don't have to worry about that. For the earlier style Mazak users, that is the controls Fusion 640T and below, you only get one set of stock amounts. FinX, FinZ appears on the common unit. So for T Plus and T32 and such forth, I'd recommend you go ahead and give it some X stock anyway. These values, the stock amounts for your first rough cut, will appear at the top of your Mazak common unit. Again, that's for the earlier style Fusion 640T and below Mazak programs. The next row down here, depth of cut per pass, is how much you're taking off per slice. We're going to take off 50 thousandths per slice on the nose as we march our way inwards. For Mazotrol, this depth of cut per pass is your R depth. In the middle here, the cut angle is what direction to rough. We only have one rough cut, so if you want a face rough versus, shall we say, OD rough, you need to give it the angle. This is a degree angle. When we say 180 degrees, we're talking about primarily removing the material towards 180 degrees. That would be towards 9 o'clock, for example. So 180 would be typical for an OD or an ID rough. The tool would come down an X and rough across towards 9 o'clock or 180 degrees, retract up, and then return and repeat. For a face rough, okay, so for a face rough, we want 270 degrees. That is, we typically want the cutter to come in Z and then cut down towards 6 o'clock or towards 270 degrees. Then it will retract and then retract back up in X and then repeat this process again. So again, for OD and ID roughing, your cut angle is going to be 180, and for face roughing, you want 270. On the right here, clearance, this is for G-code only. That's how much it's going to retract. In this case, since we're doing a face rough, retract in Z when it's done cutting. It's going to cut in the depth per peck towards 270 degrees and then retract this clearance amount. For Mazotrol, you don't have to worry about the clearance. That's a parameter on the machine. Once you jump down to the middle left here, the general feed is the roughing feed rate we're going to use. Up above we have IPR, as in inches per rev checked. This will be your Mazotrol R feed. The finishing feed is active if you're doing a finish pass, and we have this button up here, cleanup selected, so we are going to get a finish pass, a G70 at the end of this G72, or a finish tool developed as part of this facing process for Mazotrol. This is the feed rate for the for the finish pass, I'm sorry. For Mazotrol, the finish feed is the rough box to the right of each of the shape lines in the process. Going on down here to the bottom, we're just going to hit Do It. And now on the bottom left of the graphics, it says Select Start Point. So for Mazotrol, this is the CPTX, CPTZ that you're selecting, as if you were doing a bar face. For G-code, we're talking about the corner of the bar stock. We don't have any stock drawn in here, but it needs to know kind of where to start roughing. So I'm going to just kind of type in a point here. You can just eyeball a point by left-clicking with your mouse, but I'm going to press on the keyboard X. Now this part is about 7 inches in diameter, so I'm going to assume that the stock itself is about 7 1/4. For Mazotrol, X 7.25 would be fine. For G-code, give yourself a little bit of extra stock. Again, if the raw stock is 7 1/4 in diameter, go 7.3. Add a little extra, let's say 50 thou. This is the point that is going to stop rapiding and start feeding. Likewise, I'm going to just hit Enter for OK. I'm going to hit Z on the keyboard to set the Z of this bar stock corner point. Z0 would be right up on the face of the part. That's not where we want to start, that's where we want to end. So I'm going to tell it kind of how much the stock is hanging out in front of the face of the part. I'm going to give it 100 thou in this case. Again, for Mazotrol, 100 thou would be fine. I'm going to add another 50 thou for G-code, just to give it a little bit of extra clearance. For Mazotrol, you've got a built-in clearance. No need to compensate for that. Okay, so that leaves a little circle kind of right there on the CAD screen right there. It's not moving. I've already typed in the X and Z, and down at the bottom it still says Select Start Point. I need one more Enter on the keyboard to confirm or lock in that point. Prior to hitting Enter to confirm, I can keep typing in X and Z all day to change that starting point. Now at the bottom left it says Select First Object. This is the final edge of the part that you're going to highlight, and it's going to rough from the kind of corner of the bar stock here up to that final edge. For Mazotrol, this is the shape lines. Now we want to rough from the top down. So we're going to pick this vertical line on the front face of the part, favoring the upper half. If I left-click on it once, it'll make a highlight on it. Remember, the blue highlight is your current cut, or what you're working on right now, versus the yellow are things you haven't cut at all. And I'm going to go over here and I'm going to hit Done. Once I do that, Geopath will rough between the starting point, coming in the depth per peck in Z, roughing down in X, up until it hits the end of my highlight, and then retract the clearance amount, wrap it back up, and then repeat. Feed in, wrap it down, or feed down, feed or wrap it back up, that sort of thing. Now in this case, we're okay for G-code down to a point. Because the front face of the part has this big open bore, it didn't know that you wanted to go all the way down to 0, 0. It kind of went down to where the highlighted ended here. So we're going to kind of stretch this cut out a little bit more to kind of include this bottom area, so it goes all the way down to Z0, X0, even though this ultimately will be bored out later.